Yes, I'm the Reverend Deanna Hollis. I am the um, Gun Violence Prevention Ministry coordinator for the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. And what that means is that my role is a community builder. So, the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, we have folks that have downloaded our toolkit or who have said, "Count me in." We have currently now over 1,000 names on this list. And so we are trying to build community with each other to be able to support one another, to provide encouragement for one another, as well as to share resources with one another. So that's what my role is to connect us so that we can do this job, not as solo isolated congregations and individuals, but as a community that's all going to work together to affect change. So I'm going to give you an outline of what to expect today. So first, we're going to talk about why the church should be involved in this issue. Then I'm going to give you a tool, the breath prayer, that you can use. It's a spiritual practice that you can use to help you start to manage kind of your own emotions and breath as you enter into this work, because gun violence prevention can be very difficult and emotional work. Then we're going to talk about 3 action areas that you can start in your congregations. And those 3 areas are going to be prayer and worship. They're going to be connecting through story. And then the 3rd area is education. And then we'll have a time for question and answer, as well as then we'll close after that. And as Emily said, there will be time. We just have an hour today, and I'm going to keep us very much on schedule as close as we can, so that but we'll have follow-up conversations and lots of opportunities to continue this. So the first question that I get asked a lot is, why should the church be involved in this issue? And quite simply is because it involves the cost of life. And anything that moves us from life towards death is a matter for the church to be concerned with. And in Isaiah 65, God lays out a vision for creation. And in this vision, it says, this is from Isaiah 65, "For I'm about to create Jerusalem as a joy, and its people as a delight. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and delight in my people. No more shall the sound of weeping be heard in it, or the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant that lives but a few days, or an old person who does not live out a lifetime. For one who dies at 100 years will be considered a youth." And I think this is a vision that the church can hold, a vision for creation, to be able to say, this is where we're going. This is what God has in store and in mind for creation. So that as we live out our lives, we can always ask, is what I'm doing moving us towards that vision or away from that vision? So as we have that vision, we can also think about what Jesus says, and that Jesus says the greatest commandment is this: to love God and to love neighbor as ourselves. So this is very challenging, I think, that and the reason why is that line, to love neighbor as we love ourselves, and that we don't always love ourselves fully. That the violence that we inflict on others also can be rooted in the violence that we inflict upon ourselves. And so as we go through to solve this issue of gun violence, it's going to require 2 things. It's going to require a legislative change, but it's also going to require a cultural change. And I think that's a place that the church is uniquely designed and positioned for. Because in the church, we have spiritual practices that help us to do this deep soul work of repentance and forgiveness. So that's where we're going to begin today, is with a spiritual practice that you can use to help love all that is within you, so that you can love others as you go out and do this work. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a breath prayer. And we're going to begin, I'm going to guide you through this process, that we want to get to where we can breathe anywhere from 4 to 5 breaths per minute. And in order to do that, we're going to breathe basically to the count of 10. We're going to breathe in for the count of 5, and we're going to breathe out to the count of 5. And by taking these long, slow relaxation breaths, it's going to be able to help take our body out of fight or flight and into rest and relaxation. And this is because, like I said, as we do this work, as we encounter victims of gun violence, as we encounter perpetrators of gun violence, there is a lot of energy here and a lot of emotion. So this is a tool that you can have to help you, if you notice that your body is starting to go into fight or flight, to be able to calm yourself back down. So I'm going to guide you through this breath. And as I do at the end, I'm also going to read to you a story of a young woman who was the victim of gun violence. She's one of the 1,200 children and youth that are killed every year in this country by a gun. And it's important that we remember why it is that we do this work. And we do it for the victims, and we do it for their families. So let's begin by just breathing in and out through your nose and all the way down into your belly. We want to take deep, slow breaths, and to get all the way down and fill it with air, to fill the bottom of our lungs with air. So as we breathe in, the belly should be expanding. So just kind of do this for a minute on your own to get comfortable with what that's like. And then I'm going to begin to guide you through a process that will extend this breath all the way out to 5. So I invite you now to breathe in and breathe out. Inhale, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3. Inhale, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3. And we're going to begin to increase this. So inhale, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I invite you to keep doing that on your own, as I'm going to read to you the story of Peyton Nicole Hurt. Peyton spent her days painting watercolors. She would often sing in the shower, in the car, for her family. She loved her siblings, her nephews, the people that surrounded her. She was always there for them. She hugged when they cried. She talked when they couldn't. She smiled until they would laugh. She loved helping others. Peyton Nicole Hurt, 15, was shot at a house party by her ex-boyfriend in Ledbetter, Kentucky on June 9th, 2018. She was kept on life support long enough to donate her organs. Amen. So this can be tough stuff. There's lots of emotions that can come up. So I invite you, as you do that breath, you can also add a form of welcoming prayer in which you welcome on the inhale, not only whatever feeling or sensations that are coming up, but you're welcoming the spirit, the breath of life, into that breath with you. And then on the exhale, say the word compassion, so that you hold all that is with compassion like you would hold a hurting child. So that you breathe in welcome and you breathe out compassion. And this is a practice that you can do as you go throughout your day. And like I said, anytime you encounter something that makes you uncomfortable, that's a difficult feeling or emotion, to just stop and breathe in welcome, knowing that you're welcoming the spirit into this with you, and breathe out compassion so that you're holding whatever it is with compassion. That'll keep us from being reactive and from having a furthering violence ourselves as we encounter folks. So this workshop, it's assumed that this is an introductory workshop, that most of the folks on this call are folks that are just starting out, that they're looking for ways to begin this conversation within their congregation. But that may not be the case. We may all have very different reasons for being here today. So we're going to begin with a poll just to get a feeling for who's with us. So Emily, can you put that poll up? Here it is. So if you can answer this, what is your congregation's level of engagement with the issue of gun violence prevention right now? We've never talked about gun violence in my congregation. We've had some conversations or heard sermons, but it's not really an issue our congregation is deeply engaged with. The next one is, we have had some conversations and are looking for next steps. It's an issue many in our congregation care about. And then the fourth one is, this is an issue my congregation is engaged in. All right. So our results are in, and that we have basically 13% have never talked about gun violence. 32% have talked about it some, but not deeply engaged. 40% are at, we've had some conversations and are looking for next steps. That is the largest. And then 16% say that this is an issue my congregation is engaged in action. Like I said, so where we're going to be today, that certainly doesn't mean we can't have kind of more advanced conversations, but this is really about actions for where to begin for congregations where this may be difficult, where you may have folks that are differing opinions and you just kind of want to begin somewhere, but you're not really sure where. So the first area is going to be prayer and worship, because all that we do as people of faith, that's where it always begins, is in prayer and worship. So what some congregations have done is that there are, they light candles. So they can do this either at the beginning or sometimes during the prayer for the people. They'll light candles to remember victims of gun violence. And this can look many different ways. You can either have a single candle to be representative of all. Or if you have a particular incident that you're lifting up, or maybe people that have happened locally that week, then you can set out candles to represent the number, which can be a very powerful visual to see how many people may have been affected by gun violence in your local community. So it can be national, it can be local, it could even be about children. And you can find statistics for this. And I say, I'm going to give you some resources, and we will send this out later. If you don't have something, you don't have to panic if you don't have a way to write all this down. But there is the gunviolencearchive.org, and that is a place that you can go to find out who has died of gun violence. And you can do it in the past 72 hours. You can do it for the past week. There's lots of ways that you can sort to be able to find the information that you'd be looking for. So another way to talk about gun violence in your congregation can be through the liturgy. So in the toolkit in section 2, there are ideas for prayers and hymns and different scriptures that you can use to start bringing, or to create this issue into your worship service, to bring it in, or to start or even create a whole service around this. There's issues for how to do a vigil, if that's something that you would like to do. There's also a website that I would recommend you check out for ways to be creative with communion tables. And this is Patterson Community Church. The pastor, David Frost, he started, instead of just having his regular communion table on the third Sunday of every month, he has a social justice communion table. And so he got this idea after a talk by Claudio Carvallis, who's a professor at Union Seminary in New York City. He put up pictures of different communion tables that represented ways that, so for example, one was around the issue of immigration. And so there was a picture of the communion table, and then there was fencing. There was barbed wire that surround the communion table, and then people on the outside. So David started doing this with his communion table. And one of the ones that he did was he used like a coffin for the table one time. So it's just another visual way to help people to take this a little bit deeper, to help them embody it and see it in ways from just hearing and spoken word. So he has on his, the church's blog at Patterson Community Church is where you can go and you can learn more about what David is doing there with the Lord's table and making it more visually represented of the issues that he's addressing. And then another thing that you can do, which is what's on the front of the toolkit, is a memorial to the lost. And this is something that Heeding God's Call out of Philadelphia, they're a great resource for anybody who would like some extra help. They, this is how they get folks to start. Some congregations may not be ready for such a visual representation, but for others, if you are, what they've done is they've taken kind of the idea of the candles that represent victims, and they've taken it outside the church. And they make crosses, and they put t-shirts that have the victims' names and the dates that they died. So another way to begin this, to take action in your congregation, is through story, and to build connection through story. The value of using story to connect is that when we use story, we talk about our own personal experience rather than opinion or data or facts. When we talk about opinion, what happens is that can easily end up in debate, But when we talk about experience and when we stay in our own experience, that opens us up to listening and to build understanding. So one congregation, Grosse Pointe Memorial Church in Michigan, they began in their session and they watched the film Trigger. This film is, you'll see it listed on page 5 of the toolkit. There are other films that are listed on page 6, but with Trigger, it's currently available on Amazon Prime. You can stream it there, and there's a discussion guide that you can use. But watching this film, what Grosse Pointe discovered was that when they watched the film and then they started talking about their experience of gun violence, was that they learned that many people on the session had an experience with gun violence, but they didn't know it. They didn't know each other's story and what it was that that they were dealing with. So gun violence is something that affects people in many different ways. There's suicide, there's homicide, there's domestic abuse, there's racial issues, there's the mass shootings. There's so many different ways that people can be affected by gun violence. And so watching a film and inviting that conversation is one way to do it. Another way is to have listening groups. And there's some great resources for how to do this. There's the book called The Circle Way. And in this book, they outline some of the tools that you could use, like having a talking stick or a circle guardian. If you're not familiar with this type of running a conversation, oftentimes when we have conversations, it's back and forth where people discuss an issue. But in a circle conversation, it's one where we listen. And so a talking stick is what helps us listen so that when the person is talking, we don't respond with our own opinion or give a rebuttal. It really just helps us to practice listening. So there's another resource that helps with this, and it's Living Room Conversations. It's a free resource that you can find online. They have conversations on many different issues. They just happen to have one right now that involves guns, but it's a good way to begin to find guidelines for conversations and a format or structure that you might be able to use. And then if you want to do this as a series over weeks, you can use the book Common Ground by Donald V. Gaffney. Reverend Gaffney, when he grew up in Newtown, Connecticut. He attended Sandy Hook Elementary. And so this book is about experience. And that's what he wanted, was for people to begin conversation. So he said all of the statistics in there are ones that the editor made him put in, because he really has seen that it can be difficult when we get lost in statistics. That first, we just need to begin to develop connections and relationships, and we can do this by learning to listen and share our own experiences. So the next area of action that you could take is education. So this can take many different forms. We have the typical Sunday school classroom that you might be used to. And in the toolkit on page 12, we have a 5-week study. I've talked to a couple of congregations that have used this. And in one congregation that I know of, it didn't go over well, because the person who wanted to teach the class was, the folks resisted. They thought that this person was going to have an agenda, and it wasn't going to be a place where all opinions were welcome. So another congregation that I've worked with, they decided to handle it a little bit differently. And each of the 5 weeks is going to be led by a different member of their congregation and with a varying background. So on one Sunday, it's going to be led by somebody with a medical background. On another Sunday, it's going to be led by somebody who has a background in serving with on the police force. Another Sunday, it's going to be someone who served in the military. And then on other Sundays, it's going to be led by the clergy. So by doing it with different folks leading every week, they're able to invite more people into conversation and feel less like it's one person's agenda as much as it is, we just want to begin talking about this and finding out what we can do to reduce gun violence. And then another resource would be to read a book and to do a study. So you'll see on page 8 of the toolkit, there are 2 books that are written by James Atwood. And there are guides that come along with those books. One of his first book, which is America and Its Guns. That one, there's a separate guide that you can get. And then in the gun minimalism, it comes in the book as it's written. He also has a new book that's going to be coming out in November. And this book is called, give me just a second, Collateral Damage, Changing the Conversation About Firearms and Faith. So this book will come out in November, and we're hoping that we'll be able to do some type of online book study for folks, who maybe want to participate that way. So that is kind of just a brief overview of some things that you can do. There's lots more in the toolkit, and there certainly are a lot more resources out there. But like I said, this conversation was going to be just a place for folks who were just kind of beginning to do this. So let's open it now for a time. I know there's been lots of things that have been typed in the comments, and we have a couple in the questions and answers. So I'm going to begin with the question and answer that I see. It said, some parents in our congregations are concerned about what their young children hear in the service. What are some particular ways to help children and families talk about this concern? That's a great question. And I think that the way that we can do this is, again, by teaching our children how to handle when they hear strong things that bring up strong emotions. And I think by teaching them how to breathe, like how we did at the beginning, by teaching them, resilience in the face of this. I know our instincts is oftentimes to shield our children, but I don't know that they grow up to be adults that can handle situations that they need to. So I would recommend that we teach our children how to breathe. So, Emily, I'm gonna turn it back to you and see if you want to guide us through the questions.
Sure. So if you have a question, like we said, you can type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of the window. You can also click at the bottom of the webinar window, the little raise hand sign, and I will call on you and you can ask your question, verbally. I'll unmute you. So as we give folks a chance to either raise their hand or type their question into the box, it looks like we have one question. So I'll read it out loud, Deanna, and then let you answer it. Are you available to visit churches in local areas? There are 3 churches here in Greensboro, North Carolina, who would love to host you.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of just kind of being able to put together the schedule and see how that fits in with my schedule and what it looks like cost-wise and how we can arrange that. But absolutely, that is something that I can do, is go around and visit some churches.
And another question from the Q&A box is, we got a question about an active shooter event training for our church. Do you have any suggestions of where to access information on resources for that?
Yes, this is something that we're actually currently working on. We don't have any resources at this time, but we are working with some other folks in the denomination to be able to come up with some type of resource. And so we hope to have it maybe early fall. So just kind of stay tuned for that.
I will also say that FEMA and ALICE are both groups that have some trainings on that, which are good, but they're not from a faith perspective. And so that's why we're working with folks in the denomination to have something that both is informative and also helps empower people to prevent gun violence.
You know, I had another question that was sent in before that I want to kind of review right now. And this question is, what are the pros and cons of working as a church congregation to address gun violence, as opposed to working through a group such as Moms Demand Action? So what I hear in there is, should we work with other groups kind of first? And my answer is yes. I say the more the merrier. I have been a member of Moms Demand Action, and I think what they do really well is the legislative piece, that they keep you informed. They have good ways to make phone calls and connect us with legislators. So I don't think that that's something that churches need to reinvent, that we can use the tools that these other groups already have. I'm also a member of an interfaith clergy group here, and so we take action. So interfaith groups are a good place to begin. Finding folks in your local area, if you don't have, if you're finding trouble finding maybe fellow Presbyterians, like you're the only Presbyterian, you can expand with other denominations as well as other faiths in the local area. But I go back to, so what's the unique role that the church can provide? And I really think it's about doing this cultural work, because groups like Moms Demand Action, they're not necessarily doing that. They are somewhat, they certainly have a Be Smart safety training program, but really to do the deep soul work. Why is it that we're so violent, and what can we do to change that? That's the work that the church can uniquely do. So for me, this is a both and answer. Yes, partner with other groups, but yes, also do the work that is the work of the church.
So we have another person in Greensboro, North Carolina, who would love to get in on a visit. So yeah, I will just say, as we send out a follow-up email tomorrow with resources and links from this webinar, please just respond there, and we'll see if there's kind of some regional visits that Deanna or another one of our gun violence prevention leaders could do. We would love to be in conversation and try and help equip and empower you all in ways that you need. So another question that we have are, what are appropriate measures for our congregation to attempt to put pressure on members of Congress up for re-election that are not from our region?
That's a interesting question, because there's some debate about whether or not it's helpful to put pressure on other, on members of Congress that you're not the constituent of. And I've heard that sometimes that fails, that's not effective, because then it looks like it's outsiders that come in, and so they tend to be very dismissive. So when it is effective would be somebody like Mitch McConnell, who's in a position that kind of serves everybody. So it really needs to be put pressure on who your congressperson is, or on somebody like the Speaker of the House that's in a leader that really affects everybody. Tends to be how it's most effective, and less likely to give them a reason to ignore it.
All right, let me take a look at some of these other questions. Thanks, Deanna. Oh, it looks like we've got some good suggestions in the question, so I'll just read a few of them so that we're kind of sharing advice and good experiences. One person said that networking would take care of putting pressure on one's own legislator together and in circles. So kind of like you were saying, Deanna, sounds like, yep, that's absolutely true. And we've got a few other folks who said, I think in response to an earlier question about the concern for children hearing about gun violence in church, that kids are having lockdown drills in their schools. And so they're very aware of gun violence, and it would be great to hear for kids to hear about that in the church. Okay, are there other questions at this time? I know we've got a few other comments that I will just hope that you all can read in the chat box on your own. Cool, all right. Well, so we'll take some more questions at the very end, but turn it back over to you, Deanna.
So the last thing I was gonna provide us with was, this is I kind of consider it could be a daily prayer. It's almost a mantra for me. It's an affirmation, a daily affirmation to keep me going in this work, to help me feel that I am enough and that I am empowered. And so this is a poem. It's by Macrina Whitaker. It's called The Truth. So it says, I will believe the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. I believe in my power to transform indifference into love. I believe I have an amazing gift to keep hope alive in the face of despair. I believe I have the remarkable skill of deleting bitterness from my life. I believe in my budding potential to live with a nonviolent heart. I believe in my passion to speak the truth, even when it isn't popular. I believe I have the strength of will to be peace in a world of violence. I believe in my miraculous capacity for unconditional love. I will believe the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. So that's all that I have for us today. Is there any other questions that came up?
It looks like we have a few kind of specific questions about other resources. Looks like somebody has is familiar with Shane Claiborne's work on beating guns into implements of peace, and wondering about if there are connections to that work with the work that the Peace Fellowship and the Peace USA is doing.
We haven't made any direct connections with any of the members of the chain or the other fellow with Raw Tools. We haven't made any direct connections, but we're absolutely in support of the work that they're doing.
And I would say I would just love to hear, if especially if there are Presbyterian congregations who have engaged in that. Yeah. And it looks like the other questions have been answered mostly. So are there any other questions that folks want to ask? Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like I see that there is a question in the, somebody raising their hand. So I will call on Roy, and you are unmuted. Nope, sorry, let me, oh, there you go. Go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just wondering if there are ways that Presbyterians in particular can speak to Presbyterian members of Congress, you know, from our common theological base, and could that be organized in some way across our districts in the country? I'm also sitting here with an active Methodist member that we're in partnership with, and I'm sure the question is the same for them.
Yeah, I don't have. That's a great question, and I don't have a good answer for this right now. Emily, do you know anything? Is this something maybe we could do? I'm thinking involving the Office of Public Witness, if they know who the Presbyterian members of Congress are, and how we might be able to engage them directly.
They certainly do know who the Presbyterian members of Congress are, and kind of track some of that national level legislation work. So that's one of the ways that, as we were talking about, working more in partnership with some of the folks in the denomination, that's folks from Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, Presbyterian Peacemaking Program, and the Office of Public Witness. So I think that's a great idea and something that we are trying to work on. You can also sign up for their email alerts, and they will also often let you know when there are particular Presbyterian members of Congress who we should be directly connecting with.
You know, and I think to say that in looking and talking about education, I actually missed a very important point that I had on my list, and that is the Presbyterian Peacemaking Program, that they are currently doing a year-long webinar series called Standing Our Holy Ground. This is an excellent series that they are putting together. The first of the series was filmed at this year's triennium, and it can currently be downloaded and ready to view. You can, if you just Google, the easiest way is just to Google Standing Our Holy Ground webinar. That's probably the easiest way to find it, but it's also through the presbyterianmission.org, and it's on the peacemaking website.
And we will provide links to that series as well. So I'm gonna go to Barbara, who has her hand up to ask a question. All right, Barbara, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question now.
Okay, just in response to finding out about Presbyterians in Congress, there are currently 4 Republican Presbyterians up for re-election in 2020. Steve Daines, Shelley Capito, Mike Enzi, and Lamar Alexander. And there is our congregation put together a list a while ago on it basically falls across party lines. There are no Democrats against the motions for gun control, and so that's why we were focusing on the Republicans. But there are those 4 at least that are Presbyterians and up for election, and that's kind of why I was asking about how can we, you know, in an appropriate manner, interact with those 4 members of Congress, since they are up for a re-election and they are Presbyterians.
Thanks, Barbara. That's awesome. So we have a few more questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. So let me read a couple of those. How can we access the toolkit? So I put the link in the chat box, and we'll also send it out as in a follow-up email. And let's see here, what else? We've got several. A few folks sharing about experiences of having good success talking with their local reps. There was a question about where Deanna is based. She is based in Dallas, somebody else from Dallas, so that's exciting. We will also send out a link to the poem, or we'll send out the some of the notes. So thank you for that question. Sorry, y'all are typing faster than I can read, which is great.
I wanted to make, I'm looking through some of the questions, and one of them talks about Jim Atwood and his book, his first book, American and Its Gun, and that he's pretty stark in calling out the idolatry of the gun empire. And she asked what steps can be done to help communities step up against this evil empire. And I want to say one of the things that's happening, I am in Texas, and one of the ways that we are approaching it is on International Day of Peace, which is September 21st. There is a gun show that is happening here in our community. And the faith leaders here have decided that we want to engage in conversation with these people that are at the gun show, that oftentimes what we've experienced is when we have conversations in our church, that it's usually only one-sided. It's usually only people that tend to agree with us. And so it's how can we begin, if there really is this deep cultural change that needs to happen, how can we begin to engage in conversation with the folks that are attending the gun show, that are part of this gun industry and gun empire, as it said. And so that is something that we're going to do. We're going to go in there and we're going to listen. We're going to start the conversation. And then as we find people that are open to further dialogue, to be able to, and to have a date afterwards that we can invite them to further conversation, something in the style of like living room conversations, where again, we can just begin to listen to one another.
So it looks like we have two more questions. One is somebody who lives in a concealed carry state, and they do have a no gun sign on the front door of their church, and are wondering what is possible to do if somebody does come in with a weapon, or maybe Deanna, of what other congregations have done.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what, but my would be to know the law that's for your particular state, because here in Texas, that we also are a concealed carry state. And so for us, there's two things. It's either having signage or a verbal warning. So if somebody comes in and you see that they have a gun on them, you can ask them to leave. You can verbally, somebody in the church can go up and ask. Now that's what Texas can do. And if they don't leave, then of course you can call 911, because that's breaking the law. Or have the number. I would suggest you contact your local police force and ask them what it is that how they would handle it, because it's something that really does vary based upon state.
And one other question is just a review, or maybe some key points of what legislation has already been passed, and how we can even just encouraging the upholding of these laws if they are under threat.
Yeah, so the House has recently passed and I confess that I'm not up on exactly the specifics, but they did pass some bills that were to close kind of this gun show loophole, to have background checks on all gun sales. That is being held up by the Senate. So that's like, I think one of the main things that we could do is reach out to Mitch McConnell and to be able to get it on the Senate docket so that it can be voted on, to reach out to your senator, demand a vote. They're also passing a red flag law, which is whenever somebody has a gun and is showing signs that they are a threat to themselves or others, it's a tool for law enforcement to be able to go in and temporarily remove those firearms. So again, these are ones that they've passed the House, but they need to be passed in the Senate. This is really important because some states have them and some states don't. So you look at what happened, I think the mass shooting in Ohio is a great example of the need for national gun laws, because that shooter traveled to Texas where he could purchase a gun that he wasn't going to be able to purchase in Ohio. So that's why we need to have some national laws.
And another question related to that is, how effective do you think a petition from our congregation signed by many would be directed to our legislators? Do you have any suggestions for this approach?
I think yes, it's effective. Yes, I would always do it. If that's something that you can do, and if that's where you can begin, absolutely. Because the more pressure that churches start to put on legislators, the better. It provides, particularly even if you have a Republican lawmaker, because the more they start to hear from people, then the more that they can start to begin to realize that they are out of step with with their constituents, and that they can get voted out, that they don't have to be a Democrat, that this is an issue that should be bipartisan, that they should both be concerned about. And so by putting the pressure, by writing those letters, that's how change is going to come. Because realistically, we're not going to be able to turn everything Democratic, but what we can do is make it an issue that's bipartisan. And the way that that's going to happen is by putting the pressure on Republican lawmakers.
So here's a question. How do you speak about gun violence with somebody who loves guns simply for sport and not for protection or hunting, like for food, etc.?
Yeah, I think, again, it's about listening. It's about being respectful of their position. I don't think anybody's in favor of gun violence. And so those are the folks that we need to join this effort. It needs to be gun owners who believe in responsible gun ownership, who believe in gun sense legislation, who are concerned about what's happening that makes us violent. We have to start where people are at and bring everybody into this conversation. So I think the first thing to do is just to start asking them questions, to be able to listen to them. Tell me about what it is that you love. Tell me about what it is that you're afraid of. Tell me what you think could be done differently. Violence is often a lack of imagination and creativity. And so the more we can start to be creative and imagine a different way, that's what we need right now to be able to create change.
Thanks. And it looks like we do not have any other questions. So I'll just read a couple of comments that folks have sent in and add one more. One being that somebody mentioned that, and this is very true, that calling the police is not always a safe thing for all congregations. And so I think that's goes back to Deanna's point about if you are a congregation that has put up a no gun sign, or if you have somebody who has come into your building with a weapon, what to do. And so, yeah, absolutely. That's going to depend entirely on context, both the context of your congregation and of your local area. And so that's one of the things that we're working on with the other folks in the PCUSA, is how to kind of address some of those fears and anxieties that are context specific. Somebody else had said that the federal background check legislation that's being held up by Mitch McConnell is HR 8, if you want to look it up. So thank you for that. Somebody sharing a resource, the trace.org, which is a good gun violence prevention specific news source. And they actually interviewed Deanna when she was ordained. So we were really excited that she was on there. Deanna, is there anything that you want to say in closing?
All I can say is just begin. It doesn't matter how perfectly or imperfectly it is that you go about this work. Just begin. Whether it's a side group in the congregation, whether it's in your session, whether it is by joining an outside group, wherever you can begin, that is the right answer. So thank you.